Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Beth Wonson. Beth is a coach, consultant, CEO, and founder of Navigating Challenging Dialogue. She has coached hundreds of professionals all over the world, teaching people how to have meaningful, drama-free conversations. Beth teaches companies how to take miscommunication, chaos, and costly conflicts and turn them into a culture that fosters employee satisfaction, retention, and performance. Grounded in proven methods of self-management, Beth's process guides leaders to communicate directly and effectively while strengthening their company's fundamentals. Welcome, Beth. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to our talk.
Me too. So we are going to dive into challenging conversations, overcoming resistance to giving and receiving feedback. So Beth, challenging dialogues can take place in our workplace, our relationships, our family dynamics, even on the phone with a customer service representative, say from Amazon or Verizon or somewhere, right? Basically, anyone that we communicate with. And so I used to work in the healthcare field, and my entire day was full of challenging dialogues, from having a conversation with a grieving family all the way to having to shift into having a strategic plan meeting with an administrator at the hospital. And I now work with people constantly and around the fight, flight, or freeze response. And this is something that always comes into play when we have challenging dialogue. So, Beth, why do people struggle so much with having challenging conversations?
Well, that's a great question. And that's really kind of the whole basis of the work that I do. So the whole process, I'm glad you brought up the fight, freeze scenario, because the whole thing that happens is our thoughts are what really prevent us from wanting to have tough conversations. And our thoughts are what trigger us to go into that panic zone or to go into the fight or flight mode. It's not necessarily the content that's in front of us, but it's what we think, what we imagine might happen. Where might this go? And so as we get wrapped up in our thoughts, our resistance builds up. So you can imagine that, the next day you're going to have a difficult conversation. You're going to have to give someone feedback or give them bad news, or even talking to your spouse or a friend or whatever. And so you spend that whole night laying awake and turning it around, and you drive to wherever you're going. And the whole time you're repeating the story and you're imagining all the places it could go. Well, what's literally happening inside your brain is your amygdala is saying, uh-oh, I need to protect you, right? And it sends those messages down to your adrenal glands, and the adrenaline and cortisol start to go up. And that's literally what fight or flight mode is. So you either show up at the conversation ready to defend yourself, blame, justify, prove them that they're wrong, make your point and win, or you say, I don't think I'm going to have this conversation. Maybe I'll hint about it and see if they get the message, or, maybe I'll just suck it up. Right. Yeah. Avoid entirely. And so it's really our thoughts and our thought process that make us choose to avoid these conversations.
Yeah, and it can be really scary. I know when I would have to we did this thing called after action reviews after we had, I worked in organ donation and tissue transplantation, and I would have to go speak to doctors after the case. And I would be playing that out in my mind as to, okay, how am I going to approach? What is my energy going to look like? How am I going to, and they would run from me. It was really funny because they didn't want to have the difficult conversation. And so I had to start to kind of foster that energy beforehand, say, okay, this is not a stressful conversation. We're going to just sit down and have a dialogue. And once I did that, it was just more like two colleagues having a conversation versus this, authoritative figure coming in. And that's not how I was trying to approach it, but that's how they were receiving it.
Yes. So in the Navigating Challenging Dialogue program, which is the program that I teach in the accompanying book, is called Turn This Conversation Around. We talk about the mantras, which are the principles. And the first one is be aware of the energy you bring. Because the minute you walk into a tough conversation and you're stressed or anxious or on the defensive or whatever, the other person begins to pick up on that. And they're reacting to that energy. But if you walk in balanced and breathing and just not projecting that things are going to go bad, but with that energy of, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to have some ways to come about some understanding. I'm going to show up with curiosity and empathy. And as a learner in this dialogue, and when you shift your energy to that, people literally align to that energy, and it helps them to come back down.
Absolutely. Our energy plays a huge role in how we approach any conversation, whether it's difficult or not. And I know, Beth, you work a lot with managers and executives, but how can we use these skills in our everyday lives when it comes to just having a conversation with a friend about something that may feel a little awkward or difficult?
It's so funny you say that, because people ask me all the time, well, why do you work with companies or nonprofits or government agencies? Because everybody needs these skills. And I say, because that's where people are, right? So if I teach them through the lens of the work, people inevitably contact me and say, oh my gosh, I use this with my teenage daughter or my husband or my neighbor or whatever. And it got such an impactful result. And I love that. But the first piece is to identify what are the facts, right? And sift those out of what are the stories. So if you want to talk to your partner or your spouse or your housemate about something as simple as how to load the dishwasher, like how many of us have had gigantic arguments about that, right?
Yeah. Easy things, right?
Easy things. And so, but by the time you get to that conversation, you're all riled up, and you lead with, every time you put your dishes in the sink and you don't put them in the dishwasher and you don't rinse them enough and you don't put them in the right place. And before you know it, all this energy is coming out, and you're talking about the time 3 years ago when they were a half hour late for lunch. And
I call that garbage dumping, Beth.
Garbage dumping, yeah, piling on. You start to get traction, and all of a sudden you're vomiting everything. Instead, before you begin the conversation, you simply identify what are the facts. The facts are that your life would probably be easier if you didn't have to always go in and deal with the dishes in the sink or whatever, right? That's the fact. That's the fact. And then go to curiosity. I'm curious why you do this. What is happening that you do it? We just had this situation in my house a couple of weeks ago. I'm the one who goes and dumps the dishes in the sink, but I ate lunch during one meeting, and then I had another Zoom call coming up right away. And so I wanted the dish to soak before I put it in the dishwasher. And I was going back after the call to deal with it. So some curiosity goes a long way. Like, why is this happening? Well, I had a perfectly good reason. And my intention was to come and clear it later. And so starting with what are the facts, staying in fact, and then going to curiosity. And when we engage with curiosity, we are able to get some empathy and work on building those empathy muscles. So the result of my conversation was, oh yeah, you are having a really busy day. I'll just take care of that for you this time. Oh, thank you. That's super helpful for me, right? Because empathy was built. And so now we can come up with a win-win. I understand that my partner really gets worked up when I don't put the dishes in. And now she understands that there's times when it's intentional. It's not just that I'm being lazy. Right?
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
just gratitude too after that, just saying thank you for putting the dishes away from me. That was very helpful. And I think, looking back, I'm divorced now, but back in my marriage, that would have been very helpful had I shared that information, just said thank you versus getting frustrated and being a pressure cooker and then blowing up and expecting things to happen. Looking back at that time, I could have used your tools and tips to be able to navigate those challenging dialogues, which don't have to be so challenging. I guess we just make them challenging, right?
Yeah. Well, and the reason that I created all this was because for the first 40 years of my life, 45 years, I responded to almost everything emotionally
Mhm.
and with a very low level of self-awareness. So people would say, oh, Beth, you're so direct. You're so clear in your communication. Oh, Beth, you're so emotional. Well, none of those things were really great, right? Particularly for leading teams and leading people. And I felt like there had to be another way that I could show up. And so I began doing my research on brain-based research, understanding how and why adults are motivated, what we need to be successful, how the brain works, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. And I put together this program to help me to have better connections, better relationships, empower, motivate, and inspire the people who worked for me. I put it together because I needed it. And then in 2015, I started offering it to other people. And ever since then, this is what I've been teaching. So I teach coaching through navigating challenging dialogue, feedback through navigating challenging dialogue, and navigating challenging dialogue as its own program.
Isn't that usually the case? We need help for something or on something, and then we move through it, and then we realize, wow, this could actually help other people in the
Yes,
process.
I thought I was alone in this problem, but I was not.
Oh,
Yeah.
no. And, so Beth, what advice or tips do you have for people who might need to find some confidence in initiating a challenging dialogue? I know, for me, it became more normal for me to just expect these challenging dialogues because I knew that was a part of my job at the time. But when it came to having dialogues with friends or family, I would kind of, you got the fight, flight, or freeze. I would do the flight. I would be like,
Right.
I have challenging dialogues all day at work, and now I don't want to deal with a challenging dialogue in my personal life. So, do you have
I
any
get
tools or
that.
tips for people that might be
Yeah.
struggling with that?
Yeah. So in the book, I keep going back to the book because I finally wrote the book so that it would be more accessible to everybody. And in the book, there's a series of worksheets that you can go through to plan for a tough conversation. So you strip out all your assumptions, all your unspoken expectations. You get really clear on what your thinking errors might be, right? Like, this is the way it was. This is the way it should always be. Really? Is that true? Or is that a thinking error? Right. And so you work on those pieces and then you end up with a plan for how you're going to approach the conversation, because our brain loves having a plan. It's when your brain doesn't have a plan that it goes off on all these, what if this happens? What if that happens? And you end up all worked up. In the absence of having those resources, the first thing I would say, and you talked about gratitude, if you find yourself worrying and stressing and running things over and over in your mind, pause, take a deep breath, and just sit for a little while and think about what you're grateful for. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. Like, oh, I'm grateful I have this chair. I have a little seat warmer that goes on the back of my chair so I can turn it on when I'm feeling chilly. Oh, I'm just so grateful that I have this. Because your brain can't hold stress, anxiety, worry, storytelling, and gratitude at the same time.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't have to be a big, long effort to feel grateful. Just feel grateful. Listen for the beat of your heart. And if you can't hear it, pretend you can. Imagine what it sounds like. Our heart's been with us since 6 weeks after conception. It has observed every single solitary thing in your life.
Sure has.
It works on your behalf without you asking it to do a thing. And it takes in information from the outside and it gives you pure information. Your brain turns that all around, makes assumptions and twists it around and manipulates it. But your heart takes in what's pure in the environment. So just feel gratitude for that, for the beating of your heart. That's all you have to do. And that brings you down out of the panic zone. That brings you back down to what I call center. Some people think joy and abundance is achieving all kinds of things and journaling enough and yogaing enough and meditating enough and all these types of things. To me, joy and abundance is the ability to feel and acknowledge my full range of emotions, but then bring myself back to center with breath, with gratitude, with listening for the beat of my heart. And so that helps you self-regulate so that you can go into the conversation clean and clear. And then just identify what are the facts you want to talk about. And then just show up with curiosity and empathy.
Yeah. And so, we've all been in that position, Beth, where we visualized having a conversation in our mind and we visualize it just working out perfectly. But then we get into the conversation and we realize, whoa, this isn't going as well as I had planned or I had visualized in my mind. So how do we turn a conversation around when it starts to spiral out of control?
Yeah. So that's why the planning process is important, because it's important to know what your anchor points are. What are the key facts that are very important to you? So if the conversation starts to spin out of control, the other person starts to get triggered, things start to go bad, resting back into what those anchor points are. I hear you. I can see that this is difficult and uncomfortable. Going back to the anchor points, I tell people, and breathing and pausing, not getting into that pool of emotion. If the other person starts going up, that's when you sit back and you breathe and you just feel some gratitude. And then I say 3 times you go back to the anchor point. If after the 3rd time the person just can't, one of the other mantras of the program is the only person you can manage is yourself. Mm-hmm. And so you say, well, it seems like this is not a great time for this conversation. Why don't we go back to it in a couple days? Or why don't we both take some time to think about it and reconvene, or whatever the case is. But it keeps you from getting into this non-productive conversation or argument that goes all over the place and it is unactionable. There's no way anybody can take action on.
Yeah, and it's just
that's my
nowhere. Yeah, you're just getting nowhere, and the energy just keeps looping and spiraling, and you're like, "This is just draining me of my energy." Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and no one has time for that,
No, no. Or the energy, because it literally depletes you of energy. So many managers and leaders come to me and they're like, "I'm exhausted and I'm overwhelmed." We work with a lot of schools, and this is a big thing that's happening with school leadership right now. People are just exhausted, not necessarily from the work, but from the conflict, right? And they are trying to avoid giving feedback. They're trying to avoid upsetting people. And we can't go there, because things just get worse and worse.
They really do. And I want to dive into feedback. I want to, clear feedback is essential, right? And, it's an essential component in how we empower ourselves and others. And, you developing those skills on how to give and receive clear, positive feedback is kind of a gift in itself. And, I look back at my time when I worked in corporate environment, just every January we had to do a review, and I had to write down, my review and then go sit down with my supervisor. And I would get sick to my stomach every single time I had to deal with this, because I knew I had to give her feedback and then I had to receive feedback. And it was not, there were times when I had raving reviews and then times when I was like, this is just, I can't stand this. So, why do we resist feedback so much, Beth? Like, why are we so afraid to give and receive feedback?
Well, we don't like the discomfort of it. And at its root, the challenge that I believe is presented is in our mind's eye, we always have a better assessment of ourselves than others do, right? We just believe we're more capable. We believe we're more skillful, all of that. It's our self-concept. And so when you receive feedback or when you give someone feedback, you're disturbing self-concept. And so it's very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to be the one who's giving information to someone and possibly upsetting the way they view themselves. And it's very uncomfortable to receive information that you go, wait a minute, that's not how I see my skills. That's not how I see how I show up. And so it's that discomfort that we don't like to make other people uncomfortable, and we don't like to be uncomfortable. And so I always say people resist giving feedback, not because they don't want to upset the other person, but they don't want to witness their discomfort.
Oh, wow.
But through discomfort comes growth. You only grow through discomfort. It's the only way you grow. And so my approach to giving feedback is, and I'm glad you brought up the performance review, because if they made me in charge of everything, annual performance reviews would be gone. They should only be used to discuss salary increases, bonuses, and new goals for the coming year. There should be no feedback given. Feedback should be given all through the year. You should have a culture of feedback where people ask for feedback. People give feedback. It doesn't feel like if someone says, hi, I have some feedback for you, it's not like, oh, right?
It's ongoing and it's a part of the process. Yeah.
It's a part of the process, because if you think back, I don't know if when you were a kid, but when I was a kid, we always played this warmer, colder game. Like, are you getting warmer? Are you getting colder? And you get little, hints or whatever to get there. That's what feedback is. It's helping people grow and develop. It's helping them understand how to treat you. And it's helping them understand, are they getting warmer or colder? Yes, that was so great the way you asked those questions in the meeting. I really appreciated you bringing that up. Oh, I need to give you some feedback. You asked so many questions in the meeting that other people didn't have an opportunity. So I need you to kind of identify what are your top questions and then hold space for other people to ask theirs and see what you learned through their process of asking questions, right? That's the way we need to give feedback. It needs to happen all the time. And people need to be comfortable saying, hey, can you give me some feedback on how I showed up in that meeting? In our, we have a mastering feedback class, and one of the exercises in that class is people have to go and ask 3 people for feedback. One person that they're really comfortable with, one person they're very uncomfortable with, and one person that they're not sure. And just experience receiving the feedback. That's it. Just sit and listen to it and experience receiving it, because you can't give feedback if you can't experience giving it. If you're not you can't give it if you're not comfortable receiving it.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, I can look back at some coworkers that were very good at giving feedback, but then when they'd have to receive, it wasn't as easy.
Yes.
I look back at that time I was doing SWOT analysis for my strategic plans, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I'd have to sit down with administrators once a year and talk about the SWOT, and some of them were very open to receiving that feedback and they wanted to make some significant changes. And then other ones would just avoid my meeting. And so you've got to get a little creative in the way that you present the way you're going to give your feedback as well, because I think some people already have those limited beliefs set in that, oh, she wants to sit down and have a meeting with me, or your spouse, hey, can we talk? And then they immediately tense up and are like, oh no, what is this about? But like you said, if you're continually doing this and saying, you're talking and communicating regularly, you're giving and receiving feedback regularly, it doesn't seem like this massive, thing or a massive threat that's coming at you. And I think as
Right.
society, especially in the corporate community, working in healthcare, it was like this yearly thing that when January came around, it was strategic plans, performance reviews, all of this feedback. And you're like, oh, this is really stressful for me.
Yes.
And I know I'm not the only one who dealt with that. I know my sister's dealing with it within her company too. So this is very common for us.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is very common. It's very common. And I think feedback is one of the things that just is not used effectively. It's not used appropriately, and it's a fabulous tool for helping your employees grow and develop.
Yeah. So how much does the way we grow up and the way we witness, say, our parents or our teachers or our peers having difficult conversations, how much does that play a role into the way we handle them, whether it's in our younger years or, as we age?
Yeah, it plays a huge role. So for instance, for me, I grew up in a family that had businesses. My parents had a business, my brother everybody had businesses. And so my parents could have a really loud business conversation where they disagreed and they were arguing and everything. And then my mother would be doing the dishes after dinner, and my father would walk up behind her and hug her, and they'd be talking and everything. It was like no hard feelings. They were resolving problems, right? And healthy conflict can look just like unhealthy conflict.
Yeah.
Can be loud, can be energized, can be passionate. However, at the end of the conflict, in healthy conflict, there's no personal, it's not taken personally. In unhealthy conflict, people hold grudges, they want revenge. It's one person wins, one person loses. Healthy conflict is, in the end, everybody wins, and we've improved on whatever the problem is, right? We've come to a resolution together. And so I grew up in that. So I'm more comfortable in conflict. And I didn't realize that. That was a big learning for me. I had an employee who, when my colleague and I argued, we were like in an open bullpen thing. And he and I would argue because I sold services, he had to deliver services. So we would argue, and we both were comfortable with conflict. And this one woman revealed to me that when we started arguing, she would literally hear in her mind her father pulling the suitcase down off the top of the shelf and unzipping it to pack and leave, because that's how conflict ended in her family.
Wow.
So that's when I became aware that not everybody has the same experience with conflict. People that have alcoholism in their family tend to be very stressed by conflict.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it doesn't always end healthy. So I really started learning healthy conflict, unhealthy conflict. What are the differences, and how do we help people engage in healthy conflict?
Because conflict is necessary to a certain extent, right? Because it shows duality, it shows contrast and opposing views, and that's okay, right? Because
Yes.
it helps us expand and grow.
Yes. Yes. I mean, if you think of this life journey that we're on, it is a perpetual conflict, because you grow up dependent on your family, and then you get to a point in your life where you're breaking that dependency so you can become independent. You're doing everything you can to be alive and healthy, knowing that your end goal is that you will leave this life. So we live in this state of conflict all the time, just by being human and just in being alive.
Yeah. So true. And, I grew up in a family where there was a lot of talkers and not a lot of listeners, and it was very loud. It was in order to get, your voice heard, you had to speak above someone. And that was a learning experience for me, because when I started to work in the corporate environment, I kind of would have, it wasn't aggressive. It was more assertive. It was a very assertive, but then I didn't realize that I wasn't really taking the time to sit back and receive the feedback. I was giving it a lot and not receiving it. So it's learning that beautiful balance of, when to speak and when to listen. And I think that's huge when it comes to navigating through any difficult dialogue, whether it's at work or, in your personal life.
Yes. I tell a story in the book about one of my big learnings. because it sounds like you and I had similar family life. And so in meetings, I was always like asserting myself to be heard, but I didn't feel heard. And then one day I was watching a colleague who was very quiet, and she would wait till the end of the whole discussion, and then she would interject her point, which had a lot of other people's perspective in it. And everybody listened to her and thought she was brilliant. And I was thinking, I tried to say some of those things like 10 times. And so I learned, Beth, there's a different way to show up that's actually more powerful and empowering and everything than trying to be the first one to speak in the loudest voice in the room. So there's a lot that's gone into my self-reflection around how I show up, how I communicate, how I engage, how I build relationship. That is all part and parcel of this work.
I'm right there with you, Beth. I think it's a learning experience, you know. And
it is.
I went home to go spend some time with my parents, and I saw how they were having, you know, conversations, and I'm like, whoa, I have grown tremendously since I left the house.
Yeah. I relate to that.
That's a nice reflection for me on my growth. So
Yes.
Beth, let's talk a little bit about the services that you provide.
Yeah. So we do a variety of services, but primarily we do one-on-one or team coaching. We also do some training, so navigating challenging dialogue, mastering feedback, and coaching in the workplace are three of the primary ones that we do. And we have a whole initiative for schools. So helping school leaders communicate, resolve conflict, and all of those types of things. So all of our services are available at ncdsolution.com. We offer zillions of free resources, and people can go on there and download all kinds of things, because this is really mission work for me. I mean, I believe that we are now more than ever in this time in our world where if we don't learn how to have tough conversations and we don't learn how to navigate healthy conflict, we're not going to solve our complex problems that are facing us. And it's really a turning point. So I've done everything I can to make my work as accessible as possible to people.
That's wonderful. And I'm glad that you're working with the schools, because that's going to help teach our young ones how to have healthy conversations. And
that's right.
You know, because they're looking at, you know, the teachers and the parents as role models. And so we are just, you know, the work that you're doing is you're helping futures to come and generations to come. And that's wonderful, Beth. I really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom, and teaching us a little bit about how to navigate difficult dialogues.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been great. I could talk about this all day.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.